This morning we're very fortunate to have such an individual with us. He's Professor Jerry Harvey from George Washington University. He's an old friend of the college, and he comes to speak to a very important topic. Dr. Harvey.
Are there any questions? Well, if not, I've had a marvelous time. It's been one of the better days lately. Let me tell y'all what I think I'm here for. And if it's not what you think I'm here for, I'm in trouble and some distance from home. And that is to work on some work I have been doing the past few years, one of which is getting my collar unbuttoned. To work on some work that I've been doing the past few years, the fundamental thesis of which is that the basic problem of contemporary organizations, broadly defined to include families and churches and businesses and governments and academic institutions, is the inability to cope with the fact that we agree with one another, and not the inability to cope with the fact we are in conflict. In fact, that most conflict of all kinds in organizations is phony and is unconsciously designed to release us from the responsibility of doing anything significant. So what I would like to do today is work with you on managing agreement in organizations, or how to cope with the Abilene Paradox. As you will find, it is a very personal statement, subject to my own bizarre peculiarities and biases and odd ways of seeing the world. And because it is a personal statement, and also since I found the Abilene Paradox is not exactly a household word, I think y'all are going to need to know a little bit more about me than George told you in the introduction, about how I got here, about where I came from, about my family, and particularly about how we spend our vacations. Now, I have suggested to George that I show home movies at this time. He has suggested that I not show home movies at this time. So as a way of kind of getting into the paradox, I'd like to start by telling y'all something about life with the Harveys. And just start by saying, as the map on the board might indicate, I am a native son of the great sovereign state of Texas. My home is Austin. That means hook 'em horns down there. In Italy, it means something entirely different. I found that out when I went to University of Texas football game with an Italian friend of mine, and 70,000 people gave that in the kickoff, and he thought he was in the largest collection of perverts he'd ever seen, and in some ways may have been accurate. My wife's from a little town called Coleman, which is 53 miles southeast of Abilene on Route 84. Let me just see how much work I'm going to have to do and count the house. How many of y'all have been to Abilene? Just curious. Oh, a fair number. How many have been to Coleman? When were you in Coleman? Yeah. What were you doing there? I knew you looked a little more moral than the rest. And when were you in Coleman? 60s? Is that, well then, but anyone else been to Coleman? Well, then with the exception of you two, it's a very provincial group. My wife's from a little town called Coleman, which is 53 miles southeast of Abilene on Route 84. Did anyone see the movie The Last Picture Show? How many saw that? If you saw that movie, you saw Coleman. In fact, my father-in-law ran the pool hall and domino parlor at Bangs, Texas. It's 12 miles outside of Coleman. He had to run it in Bangs, and it's a carbon copy of the one in The Last Picture Show, right down to the last paint fleck. He had to run it in Bangs because Coleman is a Southern Baptist town. There's no drinking, smoking, card playing, mixed bathing, fornication, or pool shooting, at least legally. And he ran it in bangs to get away from the Baptists. If you saw the last picture show, you saw his pool hall right down to the last paint fleck, as I said. If you remember, Ben Johnson played the protagonist role in that movie. And if you listen, shut your eyes and listen to Ben Johnson talk, you heard my father-in-law talk, and he played the same role in the town. You remember the football coach in the movie had a little tin roof white house on stilts and a tin roof garage on the left side. Move it to the right side, and you saw the house my mother-in-law still lives in. My wife and I went to see that movie down at the M Street Theater in Washington about 6 months after her dad died. And we didn't know what we were getting into, and suddenly there was our town, her dad, his pool hall, and our whole life flashed before us. We left the movie in a spring rain, walked up through DuPont Circle so choked up and just started bawling. By that I meant crying. And it was an hour before either of us could talk. Well, anyway, as the vote might indicate, Coleman is not exactly the mainstream of the culture. It has 5,609 people. The Coleman Philharmonic Orchestra consists of Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys and the National Guard Armory on Saturday night, starting with I Didn't Know God Made Honky Tonk Angels, and then working slowly up to a roaring climax. The major social event in Coleman is not the presidential dinners as it is here in Washington, but it's the Coleman County Rodeo, during which time there is a rule that anyone that rides a horse into the rodeo grounds gets in free. And during rodeo time, there'll be 5,609 people and 6,200 horses in town. And to make a bad but absolutely accurate pun, Coleman takes on an atmosphere of its own. A number of years ago, shortly after Beth and I were married, every summer we would make a 9-9 theory-wide, joint, participative, problem-solving, collaborative, loving decision to spend 2 glorious weeks of our summer vacation with her mama and papa in downtown Coleman. And I guess it was about in 62 or 63, we went to Coleman in the middle of July during a West Texas drought. Anyone been in West Texas during drought time? Anyone? Well, fair number. Let me just, if you haven't, it's the middle of July, it's 106 degrees by the Walgreens X-Lax temperature gauge in the back. It hadn't rained for 35 days, and under those conditions, the wind just picks up the prairie and blows it into Mexico. People take masking tape, I don't see any around here, mask around the windows to keep the dust out, stick wet towels under the door, and dust still just blows through and accumulates on everything. You drive with your lights on in broad daylight just like it's a dense fog, and people do the best they can to make do. Well, anyway, it's 106 degrees in the shade. It's a Sunday afternoon, and we are having what for Coleman is a rip-roaring afternoon of Sunday entertainment, which consists of playing dominoes and sipping lemonade. Coleman is dry in more than one way. You can get alcoholic beverages for medicinal purposes on a doctor's prescription. And to look at people's medicine cabinet, a plague is impending. But we couldn't work up an illness. And do any of y'all play dominoes? Anyone? Well, as you know, it's not a terribly debilitating game. Someone says shuffle 'em, somebody says mark me, somebody says your game, someone says let's play 42, someone says pass the lemonade. Having a hell of a time. Also sitting in front of a swamp cooler. Do y'all know what a swamp cooler is? Well, for those that don't, in that part of the country, the humidity is so low and the temperature is so high, you don't need an air conditioning unit with a coil and a compressor. You just take a big box, line it with hay, put copper tubing around the top end of the hay, drill holes in the copper tubing, then pump water through that tubing. It lets water dribble down through the hay and wet the hay, and then you blow air through that wet hay at a very high level, and that blows mud out across the room. Well, anyway, we're sitting in front of the swamp cooler playing dominoes, and all of a sudden my father-in-law, his name's Lehman, playing partners with me, looks up and says, "Hey, y'all, let's go to Abilene and eat at the cafeteria." Well, I don't know if you've ever been in heat like that, but your mind just doesn't leap into gear. So I start turning his proposal over in my mind, and it goes something like this. God almighty. Go to Abilene and eat at the cafeteria. It's 53 miles to Abilene. It's 106 degrees in the shade. We got a 1958 unair-conditioned Buick with no shock absorbers. And if any of y'all ever hit Route 84 out towards Abilene, it's just a series of chug holes with a little asphalt around them for aesthetic purposes. And the Abilene cafeteria is very reminiscent of the enlisted man's field mess at Fort Bliss. And so as I'm turning my proposal and my reply over in my mind, suddenly my wife Beth, who's playing on my right, looks up and says, "Sounds like a great idea, but I don't want to go unless you want to go, Jerry." Well, I've been through that one before. And I suddenly hear my voice saying, "Joy unbounded, I've just been sitting here hoping someone would invite me to go to Abilene and eat at the cafeteria, but I don't want to go unless your mama wants to go." And mama's over there in her calico dress with her stockings rolled down around her ankles, grinning like the cat that ate the canary, and she says, "Of course I want to go. You don't think I want to eat leftovers from the icebox, do you?" So we all go pile into the furnace and start for Abilene. We take a rest stop at the pool hall at Bangs, because by then you don't know whether your kidneys are located between your hip bones or your shoulder blades. We blaze into the Abilene cafeteria, have literally the worst meal known to mankind. Some 4 hours later, with lights still ablaze in broad daylight, we wheel back across the prairie through a driving dust storm and into the football coach's little tin-roof garage. By then, I don't know if you've ever been where you can just take your fingers and scrape streaks down your arm where the dust and perspiration cements everything together. And everybody piles out and goes down and sits in front of the mud machine. And by actual count, for some 45 minutes, no one said a single solitary word. There was absolute teetotal silence. Well, having been trained 4 years as a clinical psychologist, 3 years as a social psychologist, having a PhD in general psychology, 2 years of consulting experience as an organization development consultant, and having written a half-dozen articles for professional journals in group dynamics, I began to feel something was amiss. And so I came forth with what y'all in this class may have heard of. It's called a behavioral science intervention. And I said, it was a great trip, wasn't it? And my father-in-law looked up, and he only said one word. And interestingly enough to me, I never heard him say the word before in his life, and until we laid him under, I never heard him repeat it. Everybody in here will have heard the word, but with the exception of you two in the left balcony, no one will have heard it said quite as he said it. And that is, I said, it was a great trip, wasn't it? And he looks up and says, "Shit." Again, drawing on the wellspring of knowledge that only a PhD will provide one, I said, "What did you mean by that?" And his reply was kind of classic, and it was, "Well, hell, I never wanted to go to Abilene to begin with. I was just making conversation, and you idiots took me up on it. You've ruined my day." And I said, "What do you mean, we idiots? I didn't want to go to Abilene. I went because the three of you pressured me into it. My wife said you had to be insane to invite me out in a dust storm to eat at the Abilene cafeteria," and her mama began to cry. And from about 7:30 in the evening till 1:30 in the morning, we engaged in what is still called the Wilder family fight, where we argued as to who got us to Abilene when no one wanted to go to begin with. And when things got back on speaking terms, and we were able to talk with some clarity, I formulated what's called the Abilene Paradox, which is as follows: that organizations frequently take actions contrary to the desires of any of their members and defeat the very purposes those organizations are designed to achieve. that organizations frequently take actions contrary to the desires of any of their members and defeat the very purposes they're designed to achieve. And a corollary to that is that the inability to cope with agreement and not the inability to cope with conflict is central to organization dysfunction, because we all agreed that day on what we wanted to do and turned around and did just the opposite. So between now and 11:30, what I'd like to do with y'all is work with you on the Abilene Paradox. And I'd like to describe some other trips that I'm familiar with, to talk about what causes that kind of insanity, because it is indeed insanity. Then I've wired together a questionnaire, and it takes about 10 minutes to fill out. I'd like to pass it out and let y'all just ask you to briefly, in 1 or 2 words, describe a potential trip you may be on, answer 10 true-false questions about it, and then in 1-sentence segments say what, if anything, you'd like to do about it, and then we'll take a little break. And then I'm not going to ask you to discuss the answers to those things, incidentally, because some people like to put on things that are quite personal. I'll be glad to talk with you afterward about them, or even in here if you want to. Then we'll take a break and come back, and I'd like to tell you in general what those answers mean, to describe some implications of those answers, a couple of skills for getting out of Abilene if you find yourself there and want to leave, and then it should be about 11:30, and I shall ride into the sunset, hopefully paid. Are there any questions? Incidentally, as we roll along, I know this is a big group, but it may appear that I'm on a track that I got to follow. I don't have to follow it in any particular way. So as we roll along, if y'all got questions or comments or things you want to say or talk about, just stop me and I'll show you where you're wrong. Any questions? Okay, well, what I'd like, could we get another slide up there? God, isn't that magical? Oh, Lordy. What I'd like to do is to talk with you about the Abilene Paradox and the bedroom, boardroom, oval room, and airport. Not because that's the only place it occurs, but because that runs the gamut of my own experience. And I'd like to start by talking about Abilene Paradox and bedrooms, an event that occurred to me while I was a young assistant professor at the University of Texas. Prior to the actual trip to Abilene, I didn't know what it was at the time. I've seen it happen many times since then, but never quite so dramatically. And that is, I was sitting in my office in Mays Hall, and a young girl comes in that knew rather well. Her name was Sue, and looked kind of depressed. And I say, "What's the matter, Sue? You look a little depressed." She says, "I am." And I say, "Why?" And she says, "You'd be depressed if you had to get married Saturday night." And I said, "What's the problem with that? I'm marrying a boy I don't love, don't like, can't stand." "Well, why are you marrying him? He gave me an engagement ring." "Well, if you don't love him, don't like him, can't stand him, give the ring back." "I can't." "Why not?" "Mama loves him. She's got a heart condition. I give the ring back now. She'd drop dead of a heart attack. We have a room full of presents. The bridesmaids have their dresses done. Relatives are already on the road from Oklahoma. Austin's a small town. I'd be the laughingstock. Besides that, I'm not very pretty. I might not get another chance. And he's basically a decent guy. I just don't like him. Maybe things will work out." And she leaves looking very depressed. 2 hours later, her fiancé comes into the room looking very depressed. You say, "What's the matter, George? You look a little depressed." "Well, you'd be depressed, too, if you had to get married Saturday night." "Well, what's the problem with that?" "I'm marrying a girl I don't love, don't like." "Well, how did that happen?" "You got me. A moment of passion, a drive-in movie, one thing led to another, and I gave her an engagement ring." "Well, if you don't love her and don't like her, take the ring back." "I can't." "Why not?" "Daddy loves her. We got relatives on the road from Oklahoma. Austin's a small town. I'd be the laughingstock. Church is reserved. Got invitations sent out to 200 people. Besides that, she's basically a decent woman. It'd break her heart if I backed out now. Maybe things will work out." And he leaves looking very depressed. So here you find two people that don't love one another, don't even like one another, and are getting married in opposition to the agreement they share. And Saturday night rolls around, the preacher says the magic words, And metaphorically, at least, they get in the car and leave for a honeymoon at the Good Luck Motel. Anyone in here been to the Good Luck Motel? With a laugh like that, would you like to tell them what it looks like? No? It's out on Route 84. It's got a neon sign with 2 letters missing. It says vacancy, flashes on and off, full every Saturday night from 9 to 12. Abilene Christian College primarily. And then you can get reservations at your convenience at other times. And as someone said, paradoxes make strange bedfellows. A terrible pun, but absolutely true. If you followed the marriage as I did, when it inevitably went sour, they had a baby they agreed neither wanted. In order to save the marriage, they agreed both wanted out of. And then when they went through the divorce, and if any of y'all have ever been through a divorce or know those that have, you know how acrimonious and bitter those things can be. People that knew them well said about them, my God, they can't deal with their conflicts. And I would say, my God, they can't cope with their agreements. Try another one. I do a fair amount of consulting in addition to work like this. Several years ago, I did some consulting with a research and development company in the oil business, and they were going bankrupt. It is not big by the standards of Xerox or IBM, but it was big enough in the community of which they were a part, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and I was asked to consult with them about why. I remember a meeting with the president of the company in his office, and I said, what is the problem? He said, we're going bankrupt. And I said, why? And his reply was kind of classic, and it was, that's what we're hiring you for, dumbbell. But we got through that one. And I said, surely you got some notion about why you're going bankrupt. Yeah, I know why we're going bankrupt. We're spending $3 million a year on a research project that has no possibility of succeeding. There's literally no way you can take peanut oil, turn it into jet fuel, and do it economically. Now, it wasn't quite that, but it was nearly that. One of those wild ideas that looked great on paper. Everybody is very excited about it from the first time I read the printout, so I knew it'd never work. Our controller tells us if we invest any more money in that, we're going to not even meet the payroll 6 months from today. Well, if you know that, why don't you stop it? Man, you must be crazy. I've just been made president of the company. The board of directors had a big spread in the Wall Street Journal about this thing. If I say it won't work, they'll say they picked the wrong guy for to be president. I've worked my whole lifetime to get here, and I'm not about to blow the opportunity now. And besides that, I got a vice president of research that has staked his managerial reputation on getting this done successfully. He's got a bleeding ulcer. I'm not about to worry him over it. It's not worth killing a man about. Well, what do you do then? Well, I go down and jolly him up every chance I get, saying, hang in there, victory or death, we know you can do it, don't give up the ship, your wish is my command, I've got absolute confidence in your ability. Isn't that what a president's for, is to keep a stiff upper lip during crises? Then you go talk to the vice president of research, and you say, the vice president of research, what's the major problem being vice president of research of this company? And being a good Texan, he says, shit, man, have you ever tried to turn peanut oil into jet fuel? And I say, no, I can't say that I have. What's the problem with that? No way you can turn peanut oil into jet fuel and make any money from it. It's one of the craziest ideas I've ever seen in 20 years in the business. It's going to bankrupt us. It's got me so worried my ulcer's bleeding. It's nearly killing me. Well, if you know that, why don't you stop it? Well, man, you try stopping it with the president of the company in your office every 3 days yelling, victory or death, we know you can do it, don't give up the ship, your wish is my command. I want that job. He's going to retire in 3 years, and if my ulcer doesn't kill me by then, I'm going to have it. And besides that, I got a research director who has staked his managerial reputation and his professional reputation on managing it successfully. Well, what do you do then? Oh, me and the president go jolly him up every chance we get and tell him to hang in there, victory or death. It's like following the Abilene Trail. You end up in a research director's office, and then small companies, they all look alike. They got metal desk and swivel chair and charts and graphs all around the room. Very depressed guy in horn-rimmed spectacles, a little more depressed looking than you, but not a lot. Sitting behind the desk, and you say, what's the major problem being research director of this company? And he says, man, do you know what they have me researching? And I say, I think I can guess, but you tell me. they got me trying to turn peanut oil into jet fuel. Isn't that absurd? What's absurd about it? No way you can turn peanut oil into jet fuel and make any money from it. It's crazy. I don't even go to meetings of the American Petroleum Institute anymore. They laugh me out when I go through the door. It's going to kill us. Well, if you know that, why don't you stop it? Man, I'm a middle-aged manager. I got 2 kids in college, alimony payments, no job market for anybody with my skills, and the president and vice president of the company in my office every 3 days yelling, "Victory or death, we know you can do it." Well, what do you do then? Oh, I write these ambiguous reports. They can take any damn way they please. But given their high commitment to the project, I kind of lean them to the positive side to help them out. You don't know where I can get another job, do you? So here are 3 people that agree that a project won't work. In fact, it's going to bankrupt them. And they meet as a 5-person research advisory committee in the boardroom of the company. And they all, again in a small company, look alike. They got teakwood panel walls, big oval-shaped chair, a table, leatherback chairs, founder's picture, and mutton chops peering right down on the boardroom table. Comes up line item 32, peanut oil into jet fuel, $3 million. All in favor say aye. All hands go up. All opposed? Of course, there's no objection. The bus takes off for an off-site business conference at the Good Luck Motel. Living in Washington, I've been interested in how whole countries can go to Abilene. And this isn't going to be as clean as I'm going to describe it, but it's clean enough that it bothers me, and some of y'all may have been involved in it in a variety of ways. But I went back to 1946 and clipped headlines from the Washington Star, the Washington Post, and the New York Times relating to our involvement in Vietnam. And here's the way that reads. MacArthur says never get involved in a land war in Asia. Eisenhower says never commit troops to the continent of Asia. Kennedy says we must not get involved in the political and military activities of Southeast Asia. Johnson says we must withdraw from Southeast Asia. Ho Chi Minh says get out of Vietnam. UN votes U.S. get out of Vietnam. 79% of Americans polled in Lou Harris' poll says we must withdraw from Vietnam. Nixon runs on platform of withdrawing from Southeast Asia. General Westmoreland says Southeast Asia untenable from military point of view. Henry Kissinger says that it is imperative we negotiate a settlement to leave Southeast Asia, and the next headline is U.S. invades Cambodia. If you remember, that was Kent State, and a number of people were killed on the campus of that university. Whatever your political orientation, I think you would agree that in editorials and newscasts throughout the world there was a statement, we are engaged in a great internal conflict and can't deal with it. And I would say, no, we were involved in a massive internal agreement and didn't know how to cope. Let me just try one other. Airport. This is one that I've just run across lately. Do y'all travel much in your jobs? Huh? Do you travel? Well, I've just run across this one lately. I do a number of seminars and things like this, and in addition to consulting out of town where people come and work 3 days to a week or sometimes 2 weeks, and I've just found out about this trip. I've talked to both men and women about this one, and both men and women experience the trip. But I'm going to have to describe it from a man's point of view because I understand it better. And that is that after a man has been away to a program like this, away from his wife for a period of a week or two, and like, is this the last, are you okay? And it comes time, the last week and the last day of the program, Friday afternoon, before he gets on the plane and heads back home, he begins to have a number of fantasies about what's going to happen as soon as between him and his wife, as soon as he gets there. Hell, you're having them and the program isn't even over. Basically, the fantasies are as follows. That his wife will meet him at the airport at the end of the ramp of the airplane in her negligee, holding a bottle of champagne, will announce that Granny has called from Luray to take the kids from the weekend She's reserved a hotel room at the Hyatt House directly across the street from the airport, and they're going there immediately for a marvelous weekend together. The wife's fantasy on the way into the airport to pick up the husband is a little different, but on the same essential subject. And that is, the husband will come down the ramp from the airplane with a dozen long-stem roses purchased at the airplane's gift shop. Now, damned if I have ever found that gift shop, but it's got to be there somewhere. We'll announce that Granny has called from Luray to take the kids for the weekend. He's made reservations at the best French restaurant in town for a romantic candlelight dinner together, and then has reservations at the Hyatt House where they're going to go for a marvelous weekend together. They meet at the end of the ramp, embrace, plant a gentle kiss on one another's lips, and he says, "How'd it go while I've been gone, sweetie?" And then, for reasons known only to the great Abilener in the sky, she says, "Well, you ought to have been here when the baby puked in the soup." And he says, "Well, it ain't been easy for me either." And suddenly they're getting involved in this hellacious argument, fight all the way home, and check into the Good Luck Motel in separate bedrooms. Incidentally, for $3 extra, I'll tell y'all what to do about that. That's each. One other thing, all trips to Abilene aren't a negative. I wrote an article called Abilene Paradox, and I wrote it really for people in business and organizations like this. But I found that it's had much more interest to families. And the last couple of years, my office has been inundated with couples who love one another deeply, who are deeply committed to maintaining their marriage, who respect one another immensely, and who are in the process of getting a divorce in opposition to the agreement they share. One of the great tragic trips to Abilene. Any question? Lord, it sounds like we ought to have a benediction rather than could this mystical process produce another slide? The Lord works slowly, but in strange and mysterious ways. Well, I've been interested in what causes this kind of insanity, because it is indeed insanity for people that love one another to get a divorce, for people that hate one another to get married, for companies that know how to make a profit to go bankrupt, for countries that want peace to go to war, and particularly for families that want to stay in Coleman playing dominoes to go to Abilene. So I've been trying to figure out